Hi, folks, and welcome to Film Optimist, where we talk about all things film with a generous dose of optimism. I'm your co host, Seth Boyd,
I am Megan Tierney.
and we are joined today by a special guest to talk about a Italian film. It'll be our first Italian film we're covering, and it'll be our first official horror film of the season. Welcome to the show, Claudio Alberto Cortes.
Hi.
Hi.
And
Nice.
Claudio, thank you, thank you so much for joining us, and please do tell the audience what film you've selected for us.
Well, today we are reviewing the Dario Argento classic Suspiria, part one of the Mothers trilogy, or the Three Mothers trilogy. The first one being Suspirium, which means sigh for those who don't speak Latin or Italian.
Thank
I
you.
didn't
It's
even
kind
know
of
that.
it's kind of disappointing when it means sigh. You think it means like suspense or something, you know?
Mhm.
Not so much like a.
Is it English?
A gasp.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense.
Hmm.
Because for if folks who haven't seen it have probably heard of it, it has such the notoriety for being among the most gruesome films ever made, and to hear the name means size is maybe a little confusing. Well, Claudio, so glad you picked this out, and I think we all watched both versions for this episode. By both versions, I mean there's the 2018 remake by Godrigo, I believe it's pronounced, and a pretty different movie. We're going to focus, of course, on the original Dario Argento one, but before we dive into it too much, could you kind of fill us in on the subgenre this is a part of the Giallo?
Absolutely. So, Suspiria is a Dario Argento film. It falls in the Giallo category. And so Giallo is essentially, it started off as a series of novellas. Started as a series called Il Giallo Mondadori. And this was a very specific book because it came in a yellow paperback. And they're cheap to produce and they're mass produced. And essentially they were the first Italian translations of a lot of like British and American horror novels that came at the time. So as you know, the directors, the Babas and the Argentos grew up, they read these things, they were inspired, and they've created movies based off of these vignettes and these stories. So early Giallo films were a lot of vignette-based films like Black Sunday, Black Sabbath, Baba films. Fantastic. If you haven't seen them, I completely recommend those. I know there's going to be a lot of recommendations at the end, but if you'd like a nice pulpy Italian movie, do that. So they're generally characterized
There's
by
no limit to recommendations on this podcast, so feel free to throw them out as often as you like.
they're basically known for a bunch of really distinct elements when they eventually did come to film, mainly very vibrant coloring. So you see a lot of pinks, a lot of whites, a lot of mood setting via color. You'll see a lot of gore and a lot of blood. But the blood itself is very cartoonish. It's just always very red and pink, and it's like spilled paint essentially. And you'll see, I guess there's some other subcategories you'll see that are very prevalent in this one at least. You'll see some strong female leads once in a while. And I think the biggest Giallo movie characteristic, which actually really isn't present that much in Suspiria, is the presence of the leather-handed glove holding the knife. The leather gloved hand, doing a lot of like these cuts from outside the scenes, and it's very abrupt, and the camera angles are very atmospheric. So I think because of the language barrier between like this Italian cinema and the British and American audiences that eventually inspired, you'll see a lot of the mise en place telling the story as opposed to straightforward storytelling. So if you've seen this film, it's if you've only seen it once, it's pretty hard to follow because it's kind of all over the place. However, you get the vibe, you get this rich soundtrack chasing you. You get the essence of the film itself is the art of it as opposed to the story. And in a lot of ways, the story is kind of secondary to like the storytelling elements. So I liken it to like an Italian sports car. It's a thing of beauty. It's a pristine thing of beauty. However, if you open the hood, it's a piece of shit.
That's the most incredible allegory that we've had on the show. So thank you for that, Claudio. Wow.
Please do continue. Sorry, but that was fantastic.
Sorry, I just had to interject because that was just amazing.
And so, I mean, the genre itself and this film went on. It's a film, it's the film that launched 1,000 movies. So like it's got a very long tail, apart from the remake itself, which I'm sure we'll touch on, which in my opinion kind of misses the vibe, but I'm sure we'll get there. So notably, I mean, so the next generation of the Giallo, or the Gialli, I mean, Giallo films went to the 80s, but they most directly inspired like the Hammer horror films in England. And then you have like the 80s, 90s American slashers, the Screams, the Freddys, the Friday the 13th, and you have, even like I think there's a couple of instances where like the Freddy Krueger films like replicated the murders in some of the
oh sure.
in some of the Gialli.
Well, even Hitchcock did his take on a Giallo film with Frenzy, which is not really successful, but it's really fascinating to see him aware of this movement and trying to keep up. And it's by far his most violent and bloody movie.
And the genre itself often competed with itself, So you have you said that when Suspiria is released, at least to American audiences, and depending on the cut, it could have been one of the most gory films ever released. However, you have films that come shortly or around the same time that leverage this same kind of imagery and the show not infer type horror, where you have gosh, the name escapes me of this film, but there's a very distinct scene. I think it's called Zombie, actually. It's called, so it's a Giallo, it's a zombie film called Zombie, and it's got some American subtitle, I forget what it is. There's a very distinct scene where a woman her eyes being impaled by a shard of a broken door. Because the zombie decides, I need to do this because I'm a zombie, and so the entire film is this, I want to say it's a 3-minute shot of the close-up of the shard. So this is your view. You see the shard. Okay, for the listeners out there, I'm holding my pen to the I'm holding my pen to the camera. So it's a very close up camera, shard, close up of eye, close shard, eye. It's getting close, it's getting closer. Then when you think it's gonna stop, the suspense is killing you. It shows the penetration. It shows the eye popping. And so it's disturbing, it's disgusting, but it's still kind of cartoonish because it's all this pink.
Yeah.
So with that all being said, is this to you one of your favorite Giallo movies? Is this like the pinnacle to you, or is this just a movie that you were excited to talk about with us?
I would say this is a personal favorite, mostly for nostalgic reasons. It's one of those particularly pretentious, 17-year-old, in cinema. And so I found myself just kind of like married to like these genres, very like, Giallo and new wave. So just anything aesthetically forward. And I think to developing mind, anything that's aesthetically forward is like, oh my God, this is great. So when people ask for like a good horror film, it's not too scary. I always, I default to Suspiria. My wife, not a big horror movie fan. She'll sit down and watch this, with cringes when they need to be because of the gore, but it's, it's generally atmospheric. Yeah.
That is a good, we need to have that outlier there, the person who's not a horror fan's take on the movie. So I'm glad you have that in there. Megan, this is your first time seeing the film, right?
Correct. That's a theme, and if folks know for film optimists, but I'm having so much fun. I love seeing all these movies for the first time, and this one especially. I'm excited to talk about it with you guys.
Yeah, please. I want to hear your kind of first time viewing, because I think Claudio, we both rewatched it recently for this. But I want to hear what your initial thoughts first time was.
Claudio, that description you gave of that background was so helpful. Thank you very much for that. And I agree with I think the thing that stood out to me mostly was these crazy aesthetic things going on in this movie, and I think you just don't. It was kind of a lost art. Like, you didn't really see that mesh much in horror, and we have such a specific horror genre, especially nowadays, and in what horror kind of looks like. This didn't look like a horror movie, obviously. So I think learning about those aesthetic choices is really interesting, and it's the thing that stuck out the most. I mean, I was kind of surprised by also there's a bit of a femininity to, I guess, the storyline in general, but also to me, I don't know if the aesthetic, but that it's centered around women. That was very you don't typically see it in a 70s movie that looks like this, that looks of this time period. And it was so gorgeous. Like a lot of feminine mystique, I guess, is like the cool thing that I was picking up on in the aesthetic elements of this movie, but at the same time a lot like more gruesome than I really expected at all. I'll backtrack a little bit and say that I actually so I knew about Suspiria, the remake with Luca Guadagnino, who did Call Me by
Yes.
Your Name, and I was a fan of it for that. I loved Call Me by Your Name. I loved the aesthetic of that. And so I kind of perked up when I saw his name for Suspiria, but I didn't know that it was a remake. And I'm actually really, really very pleasantly glad that I watched this one first, because I've had it on my watch list forever, the remake, and upon reviewing the trailer, it looks very gray, like just straight up grayscale. And I just thought, that what a disservice to like the original Suspiria. I just couldn't believe how kind of like colorless it looked, which was really like odd of a choice even for a director like Luca, when Call Me by Your Name was to me very stunningly beautiful. Like that was a part of his directing that I was like so impressed by and wanted to see more of. And then it looked lifeless. I was just shocked and sad, but to see the trailer again, but revived, if you will, by seeing this movie. So I just have a lot of good things to say about it, basically, and was really happy to see something like this, see something new.
Yeah. I'll give my 2 cents, and then we're going to kind of describe the movie a little bit more. We see folks now we don't do plot by plot, scene by scene rather. But I will say I watched this maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I liked it, but I was a little like, oh, I kind of expected more because it's a movie that's built up this so much. And then I watched the remake, and I didn't like it near as much as I expected to. And then watching the original the day after, I loved it. I think it is largely what you're talking, Megan, about. The remake has some. I understand the idea of intentionally trying to do something different by making the colors very muted, by having Tom York instead of Goblin, But go ahead, Claudia. You have something you want to add? Looks like.
Yeah, no. I think to the point, if we're going to pile on here, I think that the 2018 remake versus the original, you have two different philosophies completely in filmmaking, right? So, whereas Argento was more about showing and not telling. If you look at the length of the film, I think its longest cut is maybe 100 minutes. And then you look at this 2-hour behemoth, that's the remake, the Guadagnino one.
Right.
The filmmaking philosophy behind this one is really more backstory.
Mhm.
Absurdly modern, in the fact that it's like it's a gritty retelling.
Right.
And it was cool to know about like so they take place at the same time. The new one, or the newish one, really took a lot of time to tell the story of what was happening in the background,
Mhm.
which removed the frenetic pace of the original film, I think.
Yeah.
And it's the frenetic pace that adds to the fear, to the horror.
Absolutely. Because I think, it's a story that I think benefits by not having this much backstory. Because so much of what is horrifying about Suspiria is the stuff that doesn't make sense. It's like, where did this room with barbed wire come from? How does that fit into the geography of this? Well, that's a different podcast. But it's like so much of the murders are really surreal in this stream logic type of way, where like suddenly they're outside, when they're being killed in ways that are inhumane, that are kind of supernatural, and it's nonstop. And I think it really benefits from just this is a fun ride, and I feel like the remake really tried to say certain things, and I don't think it succeeded in saying anything profound. I think it kind of. I'll just say this where we're on the Saturday. The thing that bothers me the most about it is you have Tillis One playing three characters, and one of them is this psychiatrist, right? Mm-hmm. And they talk about they're talking to, I think it's Suzy, it's the protagonist, and maybe it's somebody else, I don't recall, but they're talking about this idea of do witches actually exist. And he makes the point, the Nazis believed in the occult and they did horrible things. But then witches actually exist in this movie. So it has this really weird that Nazis are right about that type of sentiment that is not, I feel like, kind of underscoring what they're saying. And I don't know, it just felt like a weird taste in my mouth. um,
Mm-hmm. It kind of takes
for bringing up
away
some serious
the
things.
mysticism,
Yeah.
almost, like you were saying, said.
Because the character's making an interesting point about, like, you don't need to actually have this religion to be real for it to be a form of abusive power,
Mm.
Right.
And I think that's true, but then you have actual supernatural powers in this movie, in
Right.
that. So,
Mhm.
Glad, what did you think? Because it does bring up a lot more historical. Um, it makes it much more clear that we're really in Berlin in the late '70s here.
Yeah.
With
So yeah, the Better
some
Man.
more rural backdrop.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, the Better Man, if you're not familiar, the movement was essentially a reaction of the people that were the children of the Nazis saying, hey, we are rejecting this fucked up philosophy that you guys have. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of rebellion against the establishment that was essentially it's like us with the boomers, right? But our boomers, they're bad, but they're not Nazis.
Right. Well, not all of them.
It was a reaction to basically them still being in power. I mean, after
Sure.
who ran Germany, it was like, oh, well, I guess the least bad ones.
Right.
That's really interesting. That kind of plays in like the bleakness almost that I saw in the trailer, and it like to me the original feels so mystical because of like it's like the aesthetic elements are really kind of pushing for like that mysticism all as
Yeah.
well, and like it helps get you to that point of like, oh, this is kind of, and then it was kind of like, even it was, maybe it was a little rebellious in that it was kind of like, oh, this is cool. The building is so beautiful. Like
Yeah.
Right. I'm always
I want to be there. Yeah.
I'm struck by the courtyard of that building.
I
First,
know.
Oh yeah.
death scene of the supernatural breaking the window, like
Right.
so pretty.
Yeah.
Would you do the favor doing a kind of quick plot summary for those playing along at home who maybe haven't seen it or need a reminder?
Sure. So the film opens up. The American girl is at the airport. Her name is Suzy Ben. She's our main character. She arrives in Berlin and tries to enter the dance academy. I think it's the Tanzen Academy, which basically it's literal German for dance academy. And I'm sorry, Seth. Could you?
No worries.
That's the main original setup.
That is kind of. Do you want me to do a quick one for us, Claudio?
Yeah,
I mean, I think the bottom line is a woman comes to a dance academy and horrific things keep happening, and very strange things. Former students are found murdered, or they're missing. At one point, just like everything is infested with maggots. Just very strange things are happening. People adjacent to it die in horrific ways, and the main character Suzy has a kind of roommate in the school here who's very adamant about something. My friend, who's now, I can't remember if they know she's murdered, but who left, was trying to tell me something. And it ultimately comes out that the dance academy is actually a coven of witches. And our protagonist, despite many odds, actually comes out on top of this and ends up successfully slaying the head witch. And I thought that was a great final shot because, like, it, as you mentioned, Claudia, when she comes in, the beginning of the movie is just this kind of travel nightmare. It's pouring down rain. She can't catch a cab. Then she gets to the place she's going to. It's 11 p.m. They won't open the door. She's absolutely miserable. And then the movie ends with it's raining. She's smiling and she leaves. And I love that. And she's won. She's killed them all. She's killed the monster. It is raining just as hard. The building's on fire. And then just credits roll. Yeah. Maybe my favorite final girl moment in a movie because she seems so she seems very proud of what she's done, as she should be.
It was satisfying. I found myself upon this last watching, being struck by like the subtle smirk, like
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of like, so me and my mom are big Lost Boy fans. The Lost Boys, like that vampire.
Oh sure.
And the seriousness of the lore of it is just something to watch. But like, we just love the campiness of it too. And I feel like that was going on for this one, but it always just helps. Like, it helps me get into be really right on board for like, yeah, that's like I'm into it, I got it, like kind of thing. And that was like the fun part of the feeling of this movie too, was that it felt very like self-serious. There were real tangible like crazy shit happening, but it all made sense in the end, kind of thing.
Yeah, the movie creates its own logic, I think, and it sticks to it.
Correct.
It makes it clear this is a dream type of heightened world
Hmm.
where strange stuff is going to happen. And I think it kind of continues to play by those rules enough that I also say that, like Claudia, like you mentioned, it is kind of just jarring watching it the first time. So watching the second time, I definitely enjoyed it more.
Yeah, no. So for the ahead of this, I watched it twice. The first time I tried to rewatch it had been the first time since seeing it, I'd say maybe 15 years ago. Um, and what struck me upon the first last time of seeing it, I was struck by the loudness of the score and how the audio itself is mixed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it kind of scores back to the point of like the words not really, the story not really mattering, but the the vibes
Right.
being more worked about.
Aesthetic, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was really struck with like how just loud that goblin score was.
Even the
So at your first viewing, what did you think of the movie, or what did you think of the score?
I was gonna say the witch's voice too, like in the end, that was that was crazy sounding. Um and it's so, and like this is kind of it made me think of that this is like a dance academy background thing, and the music was music was like a part of it, but also it was its own separate thing. And like I think it more so was to create that, like that vibe kind of thing, but it also felt really just altogether a unit of kind of the dance like hall itself. I like a comparison that came up immediately was something like Black Swan, which I do like that movie, but that one felt very much like the dance world was kind of the entity that was frightening, and like the horror element in of itself. And this one, I really liked it, that it was kind of like that it was set in this dance, like academy dance world, was kind of just a background element for just a random, it could almost have been a random choice, almost like is what it felt like. It was just kind of a cool aesthetic, and the music as well, like it was so much a part of it. Like it was an interesting comparison to something that like that is heavily involved in the dance world or something like that. I feel like this was a little separate from that, but yeah, the music was
Yeah,
incredible. I mean, so incredible.
absolutely. I think when we, as faithful fans know, Megan, you have a dance background, so I'm glad you're chiming in on that as well. I think I
Hmm.
was thinking about like why a dance, like you said, like it could really be anywhere, and I think that the dance studio is kind of interesting. Like these are adults, right? These are people who have presumably post college. This is like their job, but it's also they're all living there, right? And
Hmm.
part of when part of the early signs for the character, things are going wrong, is she suddenly feels very ill, and it becomes eventually clear she was poisoned. And they said like, oh, I know you have this apartment, but you really got to rest, so we brought all your stuff over here, and this is your roommate now, and kind of you just live here now and it's free, isn't that better? And so it is kind of this excuse of, doesn't it make sense for you to live here for us to kind of feed off of your energy? and and it is a cool aesthetic. But
Hmm. Yeah, I think that like
you're saying, I'm
also
sorry.
also oh sorry, just like also in Black Swan, it's more like personal, like psychiatric breakdown kind of the dance world. And this one is very, I like that it's like the
Sure.
entities are the one, it's kind of like a haunted, like that kind of element, like a haunted house element, or it's the we enter into this world that's doing things to us. It's not like our own psychological demise kind of thing, which I mean it becomes that
Right.
in reaction to the things around her.
Any particular area of either movie either of you want to explore at this point?
We can talk about the tale, modern films that
The
are
tail.
based on the movie's tale itself, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I was like, was there a tail I missed? Like physical
like
tail.
the
Yeah.
intent, the
Like,
through
a
line.
person who's killed with a fish tail or something
Yeah.
like that. No, yeah, we should have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Wait a second here, sorry. I mean, like what you said too, but it's essentially a haunted house movie, which is fun.
Yeah.
Before
Mhm.
we talk about the tale, when you guys were watching something that was kind of like, there's witches, there's supernatural, um, do you care if there's rules to it? Like, do you care if it's like this person is cursed and here's how much power they have? If that's all made clear, or like, are you keeping track of that at all? Because like with a haunted house movie, I always like, oh, who died tragically that we're trying to figure out, who that we're trying to avenge here. Like, I enjoy that kind of mystery aspect to it, and there's a little bit of a mystery to hear like where is this room that we know must exist, where the power is,
Mhm.
and I like that element of it. Um, does that do anything for either of you?
I'm a big fan of a mystery.
Mhm.
However, having seen other Giallo films, I don't think it was that thought out.
Mhm.
I think it's
Sure.
popcorn. It's popcorn for popcorn's sake,
Mhm.
and I think the mysteries that we might have derived from it, like the hey, what's behind the door? What's this creepy kid? I think it was just elements introduced into a film to say, hey, what else can we do to like add these creepy vibes to make a creepy movie? It
Mhm.
wasn't necessarily like, oh, by the way, we're in
Yeah.
Germany, post-war. Maybe who's this?
Right.
I frankly, I believe that I think that the Helena Marcos character was like an accidental. They accidentally said a different name and said, oh, for the sake of continuity, this is what we're going to use.
Right.
Mhm.
No, I think you're right. 'Cause I think again with the differences between both movies, I think you're right that the weird things in here are weird to be creepy, weird things,
Yeah.
including the boy who's dressed unperiod appropriately, you know.
The
Bowl haircut.
unsettling, yeah, the unsettling looking servant, the guy with the
Yeah.
big teeth, or
Yeah,
the over the top blind guy with the dog.
Mhm.
right, right.
Like, oh,
Who's
this is
killed
your
by a
responsibility.
seeing eye dog.
I
Yeah.
know.
You're gonna park it outside. Is that what you do? You're seeing eye dog?
Yeah, it was odd that he's going to a polka concert right after getting kind of storming out, kind of getting fired.
Yeah,
They don't really talk about that guy. Well,
Yeah,
they literally say like poor guy is the
yeah,
next scene,
yeah.
and then goodbye.
right.
They don't care.
I feel like when it was written, they're like, hey, what's the body count we're aiming for this movie? And we just need to map out how this happens.
Right.
Like, all right, now the piano player gets beat by a dog.
Mhm.
Because and that's a kind of like that scene was more effective than I remember, where like a lot of it just him kind of screaming in a plaza, feeling a presence that ultimately corrupts the dog. That like you can imagine how horrible that scene would be in a worse movie, how boring and unengaging it would be. Whereas here, it's also culminating of a lot of other things that have been happening. It worked for me.
Mhm.
It's like another fun little sprout of violence in it.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Um,
The film itself, I feel, is like, have you ever heard the song Beds Are Burning by Midnight Oil?
I have not.
no.
Okay, bad example
We're
then.
gonna stop the podcast and listen to this.
It's a song sung by this Australian band. The guy has this
Okay.
strangest voice on the planet,
Mhm.
but it works.
Nice.
Like, it,
Okay.
it makes no sense together, but
Timber.
it works as a
Okay.
package, but it shouldn't make aesthetic sense, but I
Oh.
like I guess Nick Cave.
Sure. Yeah. I love Nick
Mhm.
Cave. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's like distance, but it works.
Yeah. Cool. So I think we should kind of talk about the impact of this movie because it is. And this movie came out in '77, I believe. I'm seeing '77 was the release in Italy though, so we'll go with that. But yeah, hugely influential. We've already had some slasher movies here in America, and as you mentioned, though, Claudio, Giallo has already existed.
Yeah.
We've had Chainsaw Massacre, we've had Black Christmas. I don't think we haven't had Halloween yet, but like, so it's kind of like across the Atlantic. There's a discussion happening with with knife wielding, particularly horror movies. What would you say are some of the other like kind of bigger influences or movies that stem from this?
If we're speaking modern cinema, there's a recent movie called Neon Demon, which
Sure.
with one of the Fanning sisters, I forget which one, Al and
Yeah.
Mm.
This is
um,
Nicholas Ren, right? Revan,
and so
the director of Drive. Yeah.
Mhm.
so what we see similar to Drive is we have this tricoloration. We have a very heavy emphasis on the lighting, camera angles, and aesthetics to drive the story, as opposed to solid plot itself. To me, it felt like a love letter to this movie specifically.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
it's funny you mentioned Black Swan. I think Aronofsky took a lot from Argento on this film, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, when we have the close wobbly camera angles, the zooms, the nods to Argento, and
We also have like the kind of disturbing nightmare scenes in Black Swan,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm remembering correctly, where she's like turning into the swan and some kind
Mhm.
of gross stuff like that that's happening.
Yeah, a little
Um,
like very light, I would say,
sure.
body-ish horror
Enough for
going on
this,
in Black Swan. But this
Yeah,
one was more, I think, more classic. I would maybe more classic body horror and more egregious body horror going on in Suspiria.
definitely, but not to like a Cronenberg
Oh yeah, yeah.
sure,
gross
Hmm.
out. It's
right,
acceptable, man.
Oh yeah.
an acceptable body horror. Well, sorry, going back to Megan, you as the first time viewer, how grossed out were you by this movie?
I was
Because like,
kind of
you
like,
obviously watch horror movies in general into this podcast, but
yeah.
Claudio, you're kind of a aficionado of horror. You've encouraged me to watch the most disturbing movies ever made, and I'm glad you have. But you're on a different level. um, so Megan, how was this for you?
I had some gas moments. I had some Suspiria shocks,
Okay,
gas, and I'm not, Seth kind of knows I'm not a slasher girl. It's just not my genre of horror. But this is such a great like compromise. I felt like it's such an I like the atmospheric horror a lot. I think it just does so much. Like it just really gets you kind of like excited, I guess, and it gets me really like in the zone and about the world kind of thing. And this one actually, I like, to me it felt um we're kind of getting into a little more modern feeling in Suspiria, in 77 Suspiria, because of things like A24 horrors, like, to me, which are starting to be like my uh, usually my typically my favorite, Ari Aster, that
sure,
kind of thing. So and I'm not yeah, like, so not really into like body horror, like how we just said, crazy gory stuff. I'm not like, that doesn't do it for me. But this one was so atmospheric, and like I like that there's still the element of surprise. The dog scene was a surprise to me, and like effective in that way. I think that if it's too much, if it's too crazy, it just kind of loses its touch. So this one had a
sure.
really perfect amount, almost a perfect ratio.
You love to hear about the perfect ratio for murder in a movie.
Mhm.
So glad Claudia brought one that achieves that. I think we should talk a little bit more about the remake. Claudia, I think you alluded to it not being as successful. Maybe I'm putting those words in your mouth, but um, tell us more about your thoughts in comparison to it.
Yeah, I think box office wise, it wasn't as big of a success as they
Mm-hmm.
wanted it to be.
It was a bomb.
Just given how much money they pumped into it, I'm sure Tom York worked for cheap. Um,
Sure.
I feel that the film itself was good differently.
Hmm.
If
Okay.
you're going into this movie thinking you're going to go see basically shot for shot remake, like a funny game situation of the original,
Right.
it's not going to happen.
Mhm.
However, the film itself, I think, feels bloated. It's a very
Hmm.
long, but then again, you have to consider the era when we're talking about either of these movies, right? So there's a trend in filmmaking, which I'm sure you guys are very well aware of, where movies just keep getting longer and longer and longer and longer. So, like, if you have this film in the 70s, it's basically 90 to 100 minutes. That's the standard through the VHS era, and then filmmakers realized, oh shit, I can just stream this and I can make it as long as I want. Release the Snyder cut, yeah.
Right.
But
Mhm.
um, so I feel like what it's done as a trend in general in cinema is created this just arena of bloated movies, and so there's more hand holding of the viewer.
Mhm.
There's more backstory for the sake of backstory. There's more origin story
Right.
for no reason. Did we need to know about? Okay, so the entire psychiatrist scene wasn't necessary. The psychiatrist scene, the opening scene.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, it's not in the original. We never really see that character alive. I think it's for one quick
Yeah, there's more
moment.
backstory than needed. I mean, why give Chloe Grace Moretz the check?
Yeah. Right. Um,
Acting wise, I found Dakota Johnson to be kind of flat.
okay.
I think that the role of the Suzy Bangin role, especially compared to the original one, you have a more expressive actress. So sure, it's over the top, but that's for the genre. It's a genre actress. So if you look at any genre, Giallo
Right.
actors, actors in general, it's over the top. It's big.
Yeah.
Right.
Because trying to, well, and you know the reason behind that is because you're trying to transcend language barriers. Because Giallo films were all shot within the actor's native language, and so
Mhm.
that's why they're all over the
Mhm.
top.
My understanding is nearly every Italian movie was shot.
Oh yeah,
I was not recording sound live.
Mm.
no,
You
no,
know, even like Fellini
yeah, if
and
you
all that. Yeah.
look at spaghetti westerns even. So anything that they do, they're going to export.
Right.
Um, they basically had a studio process where they made movies and they said, all right, you choose your language.
Mm.
But in order to make that happen, you need to be overacting. You need to sell it. It's kind of like a silent film, right? So essentially, because they're essentially filming silent films, and so a bit of that's lost now in the modern era of like there's just a
Yeah.
computer dubbing, so the expressiveness doesn't necessarily need to be there with the actress. The subtlety, well, since if you're a great actress, if you're a good actor, you can certainly
Mhm.
sell subtlety. But I don't think that the lead actress really did that. I think a lot of heavy lifting was done by Tilda Swinton, but then again, I think she's just great, and I think she does.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it was cool to see the Coven's nest. It was cool to learn more about the ritual before it was all burned down, I suppose. But it's a completely different piece, completely, or just entirely, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
But good for different reasons. If you have if you have 3 hours to kill, pop an edible, watch the new one.
3 hours.
I agree with that because I think like the scenes of violence are very cool.
Mhm.
You know, like you have this incredible. I'm making apologies. You'll get some spoilers, but you have this incredible violent different sequence where Dakota Johnson is dancing and is controlling somebody and kind of
Mhm.
fully just like almost killing them through just witchcraft magic that's happening. And they don't, and it's kind of unclear if she's fully aware of it because another big twist here is it turns out Suzy is Mother Suspirium at the
Right.
end of the movie.
Yeah.
And I'm still a little unclear. It seems like reviews are a little unclear about was she always that, or did she become that? Did she always know she was that, or what? So Dakota Johnson kind of plays it with this almost hypnotized type of
Naivete.
ethereal quality, which does often move flat. And Tilda Swinton's great in it, but it's kind of distracting. She's three characters, and like it, I feel like the main two reasons you have an actor playing multiple roles, if it's something like Lost Highway, where there's a doubles happening, right? You have an actual is this the same person type of mystery or otherwise creepy thing happening, or it's a comedy. It's Peter Sellers or it's Mike
Yeah.
Myers,
Mhm.
especially when it is fully in radically different costumes. So it's kind of distracting that she does that in this movie, I think.
Yeah, I can see that.
But she's very good at all the roles, But um,
Was it necessary? Did
yeah.
it add to just did it add
Yeah.
to the bloat of the film itself?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. I think that's just it. Like because you have so much backstory, because you have so much things added. Like you have this Mennonite rough childhood background for Suzy. Um,
So what was that?
you kind
Why
of remember
why,
that?
why go out of
Yes,
the way to point that out
right,
tonight? Was it because the man has
exactly.
German root and therefore there's a connection with with this with like the German coven?
Maybe exactly. I think and I will say I think for this movie, there's certainly this possibility that I am a dumb American who missed out on some of this stuff just culturally, or that I just in general didn't fully get it. But I'll be honest, I watched it. And I've been reading quite a bit of reviews, and I don't think I've missed anything. I think it just didn't land. I think
Mm.
that's my initial take. Is like I thought a lot of it. I like. It's obviously more boring because it's a very actively muted. It's the opposite of the bright colors. It's a predominantly piano soundtrack as opposed to goblin prog rock crazy shit, which I get. You can't compete with that, so do the opposite. But it also does just mean it's kind of more boring. So when it's bloated, and I just feel like it didn't. It's just not as fun as a movie without having a thing to say. I felt like by the end of it, but
Mhm.
That's
writers tell
exactly
me
it.
if I'm wrong.
It circumcised the joy from the film.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
that's the feel I got from the trailer. And I think it felt like
Honestly, I'm kind of mad that I didn't just watch the trailer again because you got the same place we did, and you
and
saved 3 hours.
it was one of those damn trailers that basically shows you what you're gonna see in the movie. So, why bother watching a 3 hour movie? No, I'm joking.
Right.
But
I mean,
like
you're not wrong. You're
I
not wrong. But then I tie that back. I tie the grayscale
yeah.
to
Sure.
modern film industry again. So,
Yeah.
this is Berlin in the 70s. Of course, it's gray.
I agree. Like, I feel like, well, even from when I'm hearing you guys talk about like injecting this backstory, like, well, we have to have this historical, like, that feels very modern horror to me. Like, especially like now horror, 2020, post horror kind of thing going on. Like, I think that people really like it's so intellectual, like it has all these
Sure.
connections kind of thing is the feel that I get. But like, I think like we're all kind of saying it, sometimes you don't need that. Like, sometimes atmospheric stuff is just just as good, just as artistic. And that, if it gets to that, it kind of feels like, well, okay, it's kind of like a bit of an eye roll almost at the director, or like
Right.
definitely their passion project. And it's like, okay, sir, like, that's fine for you, but sometimes like, for its own entity of a movie, it may not necessarily like need all that. is
Right.
the feeling that I'm getting.
We dare say pretentious.
Sure. Mhm.
That's the word we're circling around. Yeah.
Sure. Yes.
I think you both are completely right. Now, Claude, I do have to ask you because we obviously air our grievances with the film industry around here. Are there horror modern directors that you like? And do you think they're kind of outliers, or how do you feel, I guess, about the state of horror currently?
I'd say I wouldn't say they're outliers this one because they're kind of the leaders of the pack. I mean, if we have
Sure.
the Robert Eggers and the
Right.
Art Masters, I
Mhm.
think Midsummer and Witch and Hereditary and even The Lighthouse, which is kind of really fucked
Yeah.
up movie, and Northman. I mean,
Love the Lighthouse so much. Yeah.
the genre itself has evolved, and obviously
Yeah.
people a lot of, like they throw Jordan Peele in there too, and I think sure that makes sense too, but
Mhm.
Right.
the genre itself has evolved into just straight storytelling. I don't think either of the filmmakers that I just mentioned would make a film like a Suspiria. I mean, they made
Sure.
an homage to like a Giallo, but I feel like the industry's finally moved on. I mean, this is it's a modern film, but it's 2018, so it's really not that modern. 2020. So it's a 5-year-old film, and I
That's
think
true.
that the industry itself has evolved to a place where there's still a lot of bloat, but at least people are learning to use the massive space they have a bit more. So there's people who are given a huge playground and they didn't know what the hell to do with it. Now people know what games to play within the realms of
Right.
this new like
Because
I agree.
I don't think Ari Aster has a movie under 2 hours, and Beau is Afraid, I think, is a full 3, if not longer. And that movie is certainly not for everyone. It's for me. But so I think you're right. Like that, even like directors that we like are still making very long movies.
Mhm.
And I would imagine to a certain part of that, it's like, are there any Marvel movies that are under 2 hours? And if that's what you're looking at the box office, if that's what studio execs are looking at, then sure, you can have 2 hours for a mediocre horror movie. Not that Ari Aster and Robert Eggers are that, but I think you're right. I think I'm kind of hard pressed for the last actually, yeah, I think one of the last really hard hitting shorter horror movies I watched was like Titan or Raw. And those are
Mm.
French. Those are, or at least they felt tighter than the type of stuff we're talking about.
definitely, and maybe it's just American thing. But then
Mhm.
again,
Sure.
Luke is Italian, but I mean he's certainly influenced by the director of the last one. Heavily
Right. No, I mean that's a good
American.
point. It's an Italian movie, but it's shot in English primarily. There's
Yeah,
some French and German there as well, but it's a lot of the cast is American, or at least it's Hollywood, like Tilda Swinton.
yeah,
You
he's a
know,
goth. Yeah.
right? Exactly. It's effectively an American movie.
I was
Okay.
gonna say, an example that I saw recently was Talk to Me, of that horror
Oh,
movie, and it was under I know it wasn't
Yeah,
on
how
two.
was
It
that?
may have been pretty tight, like 140 maybe, and it was. I really, really enjoyed it a lot. It felt akin to like my first time of watching Hereditary, which was like
Okay.
a huge horror movie for me, and so I was really impressed. I mean, and I liked that tightness too. It was, I agree. That's been the feel for a long time, and it's like, oh Lord, sometimes going into it, and this one was nice, really nice.
When was your
Yeah.
first? When did you see Hereditary the first time?
It was a while ago. I actually missed it in theaters. Seth and I have an episode about Hereditary, folks, if you want to check that out. We have an episode
Yeah. Go
around
check it out.
a lot of the directors mentioned, films mentioned here, but
The Lighthouse as well.
The Lighthouse, yeah, we're A24 little fangirls, but my Hereditary
Yes.
experience, like it kind of was very literally like game changing for me in terms of horror. I was just so impressed when I first saw it. It may have been one of like my early also A24 films. I saw The Witch before that, which I liked as well, and was um and it kind of like sparked that atmospheric horror that we were kind of talking about, that Suspiria I think probably championed. So it was just really cool. It was a very unique experience that when I first watched it.
Yeah. So I also missed it. I missed it in the theaters.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of those like, oh, I should get it. But at the time, my wife was pregnant. So the first time I watched it was the night I brought my daughter home from the
Oh my
hospital.
goodness.
Oh,
And so we were taking shifts because when they were like 8 years old, we'd take shifts like so I got the
right.
late shift and
Yes.
I was like, oh fuck, what are we gonna do for 3 hours? Oh, I'm meaning to see this movie.
Mm-hmm. Oh
I think
wow.
you actually watched the way Ari Aster wanted you to watch it
Yeah.
the way I think you had
Uh,
the ideal scenario.
because I'm general. I think is Seth might have intonated. I'm kind of I really like horror films. I've seen lots of them, but I just to this day remember the gut wrenching reaction I had to the telephone pole scene. I was like, holy shit!
Yeah.
Maggie, my wife jumps on me. She's like, everything okay? I was like, I just saw the most fucked up thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Day one for your baby. That's pretty.
Starting
She'll
them
have that in
early.
her subconscious.
Yeah, right.
But no.
First time she goes to therapy, she's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
talk about this memory.
We call it our baby, but it's actually Payman's baby. It's fine.
Oh yes.
Well, when we're in the note, I will admit to kind of being a bit of a, I mean, not a bit, definitely a film snob, but I was a horror snob about modern horror and was just kind of writing it all off until I had the 1-2 punch of The Witch and Hereditary. It's like, okay, there's some cool stuff happening, and Get Out.
Right.
It's like, all right, there's some people I should pay attention to. I can. It's not just John Carpenter, it's not just Cronenberg and stuff like that.
Think of the big gap between like the profound horror films, or we call them profound, like
Sure.
all the shit that came in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, like all the I Know What You Did Last Summer, and
Yeah.
creepy,
Right. The 90s and early aughts, I think, were pretty bad. I think there's some like Wes Craven had still some good stuff in there, and all these guys did like In the Mouth of Madness came out, and like definitely not anybody's best work, right? But you had some of the old staples. Well, Cronenberg did a lot of great stuff in the 90s, but in general, like the mainstream horror movies people talked about, not great.
I think it also just got really formulaic.
The final Destination, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that was the 90s perhaps. Well, I think okay, so I used to work for this magazine that I had, and during the holiday season, October, I talked about horror movies, and I wrote this article about the difference between zombie movies and the country of origin. And I think this can be extrapolated beyond zombies, and I think just horror films, countries of origin, and
Sure.
So I think every horror film or every movie itself is a product of where it's from. However, I think it's more apparent in the horror films because the horror films reflect the horrors of the society that we're currently in.
Mm-hmm.
So this dates to Weimar, Germany, and you have Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
So 1920, not Weimar, Germany, it's the rise of the Nazi Party, the rise of the far right. You have films like the film like Nosferatu, which essentially is this immigrant from the East coming and bringing rats, and he's gonna take all of these. He's gonna take the innocent German people.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward in the 50s, conformity was in, so you have movies like Eyes Without a Face. You have the basically monster movies and people that are outside of the ordinary of Tom, Dick, and Harry, and we're just trying to conform to our boxes in the suburbs. Our fear of being different than other. The 70s, times were changing. There's like this dissolution of the nuclear family and blah 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 blah. The right wing.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a great version of that.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes out as a reaction to this. And the 80s come, and you see the rise of the Romero, the nouveau Romero.
Sure.
You have like the Dawn of the Dead and like commentaries on consumer culture. And those are, I think, and the formularity of the 90s, I think, reflects like the same kind of like formularity of like the 50s. There's this weird puritanical time, like, oh, you're moving away from the mean, therefore you're going to get punished from it. So you are having, I guess the 80s had, you're having premarital sex, Freddy's going to get you.
Yeah.
She's going to stab you.
Right. I think that's a great point. And then you have Saw dominates the early aughts, right? And then rip-offs of that, where there's literally a puritanical, like you did something bad and this is justice. And I thought that's maybe my least favorite era of horror movies, Also growing up homeschooled Christian, they'd show those movies in youth group to like see. That's why you don't do drugs. Very odd.
There's a weird Christian undertone.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, with that, I appreciate the background. If you can, we'd love to link that article. Yeah. Do you think?
I was comparing a German zombie movie, a Brazilian zombie movie, and an American movie.
That's cool.
Oh, and Shaun of the Dead was in there too, I think.
Of course.
So like the Germany is basically the Germany back when I wrote this article, I think it's like 2010, 2011. They were seeing a lot of the rise of the far right again, and so this was basically a lot of so like the infestation. I think I forget the name of the film started in like the immigrant ghettos or something.
Wow.
It's like the white guy saves the world.
Yeah.
Oh god, the Brazilian one, I forget what it's about. Oh gosh, I remember the movie. It's called Porta dos Mortos. It's a really interesting film. I saw it at a film festival. Yeah, I'll dig it up and send you.
Like Train to Busan's a great zombie movie that has a lot of goods going on in Korea. Yeah, that's a very political movie.
Definitely, yeah. Classism, the rise of the middle and upper class, and then.
No, I think that's a great point. I think that's in general why I always like genre fiction, whether it's movies or books, whatever, like sci-fi, horror, even to other extents, fantasy and detective always kind of deal with the other. They kind of deal with a mirror to the place and kind of things in a more direct way than you would expect. It's a fascinating way to understand what's a country actually talking about, what is actually scary right now, or where do they hope to be. I think it reveals a lot more than a typical drama film or a standard novel. And you can talk about things you can't do in other things. Like, you could have gay characters in a sci-fi book from the 20s, and stuff like that. Then you couldn't in a more mainstream movie. So,
with that in mind, what do the A24 films say about us? What does it say about the 2020s?
This is what I was going to ask you. Punched at.
You're the guest, Claudio. Sorry.
No, I think it's exactly. We don't answer questions. We just ask them.
Because we don't have.
It is a very interesting question. It's that's the real reason. It almost feels kind of too soon to answer, but I think there's definitely a introspective paranoia that these films have. We'll talk about the good ones, right? Like part of it being a longer movie is building much more of an atmosphere of dread. And I think millennials and anyone born after that never expects anything good to happen again. I think we kind of know that the environment, and we don't really expect the environment or politics to get better, especially not in America. So I think that might be the biggest overarching theme, but this is frankly off the cuff. There's probably some others in there, or maybe that doesn't track wholesale. But I think if you take like The Witch, The Lighthouse, Hereditary, Midsummer, there is this dread throughout those movies in between the actual violence, They're very atmospheric.
I think the history of horror that you talked about, Claudia, is really important to think about too, because I think what I've heard that is credible to me is that A24 is really a response to like these things that we've talked about, especially in like early 2000s kind of horror, and people were seeing horror, like this is horror, this is how it is, don't change anything up kind of thing, and it didn't mesh at all with I mean, I guess it meshed with low budget, but like certainly not like artistic cinema, I guess it was not it like the word was excluded from horror. And I think that like what I've heard and what I kind of feel is true is that A24 is a horror is kind of like a response to that. And I would agree with that. I think especially growing up, I was like an early 2000s kid, and that was what I saw, and that's what I was like, I was scared by it, but it also, I realized even now, is like it was very like juvenile, the scares, and A24 is very like I like that it's getting back to that psychological place, and just like higher storyline. The story is really important as much as the blood, the gore.
Sure. Here's a question for you, Claudia, on this note. How do you feel about the term elevated horror? Because I know people have mixed feelings about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think elevated horror as a term is an appropriate moniker. I do think when we think about these, even like the Wong films, like The Conjuring, at least the early ones, they did push the genre to a place where story kind of mattered more, where cinemosity, whatever the word is, just be more cinematic is important. They go beyond the just popcorn and blood, but also at the sacrifice of the funness. So there's always a sense of fun to like a Giallo film. Yeah. There's a sense of fun to like it's like Freddy Krueger movie. I mean, I'm not a fan, but I could see why it would be kind of like it's fun. The popcorn's right. So I think it's an apt description. Tell me. Yeah. It's a murder with his pinky up.
Right. I agree with you fully, because I think I like it because it's useful, because it does get people who think of horror as Freddy 5, to maybe pay attention. It's like, wait, what do you mean elevated horror? What's that? And I think the kind of flip side of this is people saying like, oh, it's pretentious. I'm like, it is, but there are also like there is a quality difference between the movies that are aptly called elevated horror and movies that aren't.
There's a time and place for color Rossi, and there's a time and place for a nice, burgundy.
Sure. Megan, your thoughts?
Sure, yeah. I agree with what both you said. I think it's like also, I think it seems like a modern term to me. In fact, I know it is a modern term, and I think that like maybe my thing is like, I think sometimes people will create things in the goal of that it will be considered elevated horror to maybe get, an Oscar nod or something like that. And I think that sullies the creative like experience a little bit. So I just hope that, and I don't think that's what like Ari Aster was trying to do in creating Hereditary or anything like that, but I think that like I just hope that it doesn't create like a precedent almost for new filmmakers, because also like I remember that horror is it's very accessible for young filmmakers. It's like a pretty
it's very profitable.
You can make a pretty good horror.
Like Peter Jackson got to start making slashers.
Yeah, exactly. You can make a good one. Right. So I just hope everybody's creativity can come out and we can see different things, and sometimes like elevated horror starts to feel the same, or like feel like there's a motive almost sometimes, but sometimes you're lost in the sauce.
I think that's a great point, Megan, because I think it can kind of become like a golden age of TV problem, where if we keep like there definitely are some truly golden age of TV shows that have occurred, but I think a lot of the ones that people thought were at the time are not going to be worth. Like, I don't think Game of Thrones is going to be considered on the same par as like The Sopranos in 10 years. A show that ended very poorly compared to something that's aged well. So I think there is that term's going to be thrown around enough potentially that it doesn't mean anything. So I think that certainly is a potential problem. Yeah.
Another problem. it's the chasing the success, right? So if I'm XYZ filmmaker, I can convince the studio to give me $1 billion to make the next. I want to make the next Hereditary, and so
Right.
you chase coattails, and so then the genre itself of elevator horror becomes
Yeah,
this the next cookie cutter, and
that's
that's the issue.
Right.
that's right. I don't think we're there yet or anything. I just think that like that may be like,
Have you watched like the Shutter?
The streaming app.
oh, the strip. I was
Yeah.
remembering the strip. I don't think so. I haven't paid for it myself, like not enough yet to get there, but I know what you're talking about.
I browse it most Fridays, and it's always it's like, oh,
Yeah,
formulaic. We can see like fast money and fast production.
yeah. That was the
Sure.
vibe that I got from
There'll
it,
be
kind of.
Well, if anyone has any kind of closing thoughts on Suspiria, we can get to that. Otherwise, we'll go to I think recommendations.
Sure. I think Suspiria is a must-watch film for any budding horror buff. I think it's a great entry level giallo film if that's a genre that you're interested in. And frankly, it's just fun to watch.
Absolutely fantastic.
Mhm.
Megan,
Yeah.
you're up.
That's a great way to. That's a great little phrase. It's just that it's fun to watch, very atmospheric horror, and kind of a almost a lost genre of witchcraft horror. There's not that much. Like that's what got me thinking too. Like, I'm a huge fan of. I'm gonna recommend to go into my recommendations here. I'm gonna recommend a witch, very traditional witch horror that I was into. I did like The Witch and stuff like that, but I think it's a
Sure.
little bit of a lost art in horror movies. We get a lot. I like ghost films the most. That kind of is what gets, or supernatural stuff, but I think witches are kind of like left out of it. So I was really happy to watch it in the beginning of this spooky season of The
Oh,
Witch, and it did its honor, I feel like, really nicely to like that cool like witch lore, I'll say.
that's a great point. This is definitely one of the peak witch movies, Megan. um, and yeah, I agree with everything it said. It's a fun ride. I think just enjoy the ride. It is some of the most brightest, wildest colors happening. I think the blood is literally red paint in this movie, and there's a lot of other red and bright colors happening. And um, yeah, just enjoy it. It's a blast, and don't really worry too much about does this make sense
Yeah, no.
because it doesn't, but that's fine. Claudio, as our guest, would you mind starting us off with recommendations for other fantastic films people should watch after they've seen Suspiria by Dario Argento?
Absolutely. So if you are inspired to traverse the rabbit hole of Giallo, I recommend that you finish off the Three Mothers trilogy made by Argento. Inferno was made, I think, in the 70s or late early 80s. It's a similar vibe. A lot of really cool spooky stuff, cool coloring, cool atmosphere. Mother of Tears is, if you're a completist like me, it's a pile of shit, but you have to watch it if you want to finish the circle.
It was like 2010s or something, wasn't it?
2006. But
Okay.
if you're looking to, if you weren't taken aback by Suspiria, and if that wasn't, you said, oh, maybe I want to watch Lips Make Sense. I recommend a fantastic Argentine film from the same year that the remake in 2018 called Terrified. It takes place in a Buenos Aires suburb. It's a ghost film, and it is probably the most psychologically disturbing thing I've seen from a ghost film in a long time. I think it's available on EMC Plus. Worth your time.
Okay. Terrified. Okay. I'm excited for that one. That sounds fantastic. Megan, would you mind going next?
Sure. I teased it a little bit that I want to recommend. I want to add to the witch genre as much as I can, as much as to elevate it as much as you want in this spooky season. And like I said, I hadn't seen so much that I love. I really like Blair Witch. I like The Witch and stuff like that.
Sure.
But those are a little like self-serious horror. This one's not very well, it's hard to say. So the pick that I'm going to go for to recommend is called The Craft, which is like a 96 witch
Sure.
movie. It's atmospheric in its own right, but specifically for 90s witchy, like grunge goth girls. So, and like, I think it takes place in a Catholic school. I'm a Catholic schoolgirl myself. Early 2000s. It was just my vibe, and it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of really kind of, not great CGI that makes it fantastic. And it has a lot of like the same elements, like a lot of like elemental things going on. Earth maggots, like I think a bug scene, snake scene, like so all and a lot of like spell books, really cool, gems, that kind of vibe. So that was just so much fun. My boyfriend recommended that one to me, and he's like, "Do you want to watch?" It was like a thing because he was like, "Do you want to watch this?" Or like we were gonna start The Chosen, which is like the Christian TV series, and I was like, "Oh, I want to watch The Craft," and he was like, "Oh man, yeah." It was a metaphoric choice, and I chose The Craft, and I loved it. So I think you guys will too.
Yes, that's a fun movie.
I also recommend that movie. Holy shit, what a gem!
Yes.
Yeah,
it was fun.
So we did not get the audio. Claudia, you like leaned back in your chair in delight when Megan said The Craft. It was fantastic.
Makes me happy.
That movie's a fucking blast. Yeah. What is the Claudia? You might know this. What's the band that has all the Joy Division covers? That kind of like grungy versions of that's on that soundtrack. Do you remember that?
No, but I do remember being a big Smiths fan. I was kind of offended that they covered.
They also cover the Smiths on that. Yeah.
Oh.
Right. There's some fun kind of more industrial grungy covers of Manchester bands.
Bruise a Bulk. Come on. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
They're all great.
Yeah,
they are. Okay, for my pick, I'm gonna do a movie that Claudio and I saw together. Tetsu, the Iron Man. And this is a Japanese experimental horror movie from 1989. If you watch Suspiria and wish it had even less plot, then Tetsu the Iron Man is the movie for you.
Wow.
The general premise is that a man is turned into actual metal machine. He doesn't know why. It seems to be a revenge thing is happening. Some very disturbing, bizarre, artistic imagery. I loved it, but also some interesting stuff is happening now. Some interesting commentary on what was going on in Japan at the time. So it was an interesting movie to watch. Especially, I'm really glad I watched it. You're glad to give me some of the historical background of what was happening with the 80s bubble economy and how people were kind of losing their humanity, etc. Check out that. That is also on the Shudder app currently. Also, it's under, I think, 80 minutes. It's rather short. It's it's an hour 17. It's a rather short, fun time. Right. Well, Claudia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Delight to have you.
It's a blast. Thank you, guys.
We'll definitely have to have you on again. And thank you for bringing such a great, not just a great pick, but such a great insight into the whole movement in the movie itself. We really appreciate that. Folks, that'll do it for us. Happy witch season.
Merry spooky.
Yeah.
Bye.